we had been taught to think of it as if there's this high bar and that you have to be physically injured, you have to go to war, you have to have something horrific happen to you. And psychological trauma is much broader than that. Psychological trauma, I define it as anything that is experienced so negatively internally that it changes the way you think about yourself, other people, and the world.
Absolutely.
I found out by experience
Mm-hmm.
that a person that is being traumatized, that is walking in trauma,
Mm-hmm.
can walk that walk and not know.
Welcome to the I Am Worthy podcast, where we don't believe in choosing between this or that, but instead we are worthy of it all. I am your host, Brittany Noel, and despite being a licensed therapist, I know better than anybody what it's like to struggle with the doubt and fears behind the pursuit of your success in life, love, and your purpose. So join me as I uncover the secrets to becoming unapologetically worthy so that you can have, do, and be all things. Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the I Am Worthy podcast. I am very excited that you guys are here because this episode is going to spark an entire series into the next 4 weeks of a very important conversation that we're going to have. And this conversation was inspired by one of my Tuesday night lives. If you guys follow me on Instagram, I go live every Tuesday night, and everybody had questions about what does it mean to create healthy relationships with toxic and dysfunctional family members? How do you set boundaries? How do you evolve into the next level of who you're going to be, but you're not surrounded by people who can really support you in that? So that's what I want to talk about today. Now, look, I could not have this conversation by myself. Y'all know that in the mental health field, I have a whole bunch of very important friends, and I brought one of those friends on the show today to help me have this conversation with you. So please join me in welcoming my friend, Dr. Alana Curry, Trauma Psychiatrist, you guys. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
So, you guys, I met Dr. Alana while we were still working together on a trauma unit. And this is where I got good at treating trauma. And this is where
That's where I
you
really
got
got
good.
good at treating trauma. Truly learned a
Right.
lot.
We were in the trenches.
In the trenches.
In the trenches. We have a lot of interesting stories. I if anything, I miss us working together because we were like a dynamic duo. It was like
really
Kobe
were.
and Shaq.
We really were.
It was.
Yeah,
So,
I pass it, you dunk it. Boom.
absolutely.
We helped a lot of people,
Yeah.
so that was great.
Absolutely. So what I really miss about us, because our offices literally were across the hall from each other. So instead of getting up and having conversations, we would just shout across the hall our conversation. So everybody would have to hear what we were talking about.
Yes, we did.
But we had some great conversations.
Yes, we had a lot of growth, personal and professional growth.
Absolutely. Because it was during that time that I was finally venturing out into my coaching.
Yes.
And you had to give me some stern conversations.
I did. But the same thing for me. You really helped to shape my next steps as I watched you forge your way into coaching and being an influencer and a business owner. And that was a huge inspiration to me as I faced my life's challenges and had to recalibrate how I did my life. So we helped each other.
Yes. So today's conversation, I was on a live on one of my Instagram lives, and everybody had questions about how do you outgrow your family, especially when you come from a family that is not healed. And you know my story that for those of you who do not know, I left home at 16. So I haven't lived with my mother since I was 16 years old because our environment was so toxic that at 16, I just knew, okay, I can't stay here.
Yeah, this is not working.
Right. And so I decided to venture out on my own and leave. And that was at that time, it was an automatic decision. Like it was like this or death. Which one would you prefer? But looking back now, it was the best thing I could have done because it was that separation that allowed me to grow and to heal from my own brokenness.
Sure.
So let's have that conversation, because one of the things that I think people don't realize is that they are being raised and they are in relationship with family members who behave the way they behave because they are broken.
Trauma is one of the topics that I think we get really poor education about, or not. We've not had enough conversation until recently.
Mhm.
You start to hear more about psychological trauma, but even when we started working together back in the day, what 2017,
Mhm.
2014,
2015.
yeah, 2014,
Mhm.
2015. I was still in my growth process because I had to change the way that I thought of psychological trauma. We had been taught to think of it as if there's this high bar, and that you have to be physically injured, you have to go to war, you have to have something horrific happen to you. And psychological trauma is much broader than that. Psychological trauma, I define it as anything that is experienced so negatively internally that it changes the way you think about yourself, other people, and the world.
Absolutely.
And there are so many things that when you use empathy to define trauma, there's so many things that people were telling us that were traumatizing to them, but
Mhm.
they didn't fit the criteria, the DSM-5, the
Mhm.
psychiatry Bible criteria. It didn't fit that. And so I started to think like, well, why is there this external bar? Why don't we allow the individual to define what
Mhm.
hurt them and what they feel like has damaged them and has them stuck? And that broadened it to so many things that people don't think about.
Right, right.
Because I think 99% of psychological trauma happens without physical contact.
Absolutely.
People can slap you with their words. They
Mhm.
can slap you with the facial expressions, the names that they call you, the ways that they
Mhm.
respond to your feelings and your emotions.
The breakup, the abandonment.
Absolutely. So, yeah, let's talk about like what things cause trauma.
Yeah.
Um,
Because I know that there is a misunderstanding that people believe that, okay, I have to be in a car accident, or I have to go to war, or this
mhm.
this huge life altering situation has to take place, when I'm
Right.
like, I went through a breakup and that completely traumatized me.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Breakups can be traumatizing. Infidelity in relationships can be, or any violation of trust can be traumatizing. Failing an important test, failing in a role, losing your job,
Absolutely.
financial stress, poverty is
Mhm.
traumatizing. Health issues, when your
Absolutely.
body, you feel like your body's
Mhm.
betrayed you, that's
And
traumatizing.
just getting the diagnosis.
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Someone telling you that your experience or your feelings are not valid, or are not, yet you should feel something other than what you feel. That's
Mhm.
called invalidation. That's one of the biggest hidden traumas. I call that death by a thousand cuts, when someone is telling you that you should feel a certain way or should be a way that is not
That how
consistent.
you feel is wrong.
Exactly. So there are so many things beyond what we think of as physical and emotional and verbal trauma, sexual trauma. We think of all of those
Mhm.
things, but we don't actually really understand how those things affect our brain and our
Right.
body and our behavior.
Right.
And the good news is that they create a predictable pattern in
Mhm.
your thinking and in a predictable brain systems that allows you to start recognizing where that trauma has shaped the way you're interpreting the world, because
Right.
we all think our version of reality is the reality. That's
Mhm.
one thing about the human brain. You can only be aware of what your brain can interpret and transmit into your body. And those sensations and those thoughts and feelings, we often treat as if they're factual
Mhm.
reality, but they're really not. They're just a
Yeah.
small bubble of perception and a lot of subjective words and labels, but they have a very powerful impact on how you feel on the
Right,
inside
right.
and how you present yourself to the world.
So one of the labels that I know I had to outgrow, because I tell my audience all the time, you have to outgrow labels. And one of the ones that I had to outgrow, where now I can say consciously that I had to outgrow this label in the moment at 16, 17 years old, I didn't know what was happening.
Hmm.
But my mothers, my aunts, whenever there was fallout or breakdown in our families, um, they would refer to their daughters as bitches. bitches, hoes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that to me now in retrospect, I can look back and look at it from a different perspective. But in the moment, it was very difficult to process that
Right.
because I grew up as an inner city child. Okay, I was a tomboy most of my life, and if you called me a bitch,
Yeah. I'm gonna fight you.
you're gonna get these hands.
Catch
That's
these
how I
hands.
was raised,
That's what we
right?
do.
So that coming from a parent figure,
Mm-hmm.
right? That coming from someone who you love, who you trust,
Mm-hmm.
it was very difficult for me to process this is my mother,
Yeah.
but she's also calling me a bitch.
Sure.
So, how do you, we are in family units that are that dysfunctional,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of this, of course, I know the behavior from the parental figures in my life at that time, it wasn't intentionally to hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
It was learned behavior because
Mm-hmm.
I've heard my grandmother say the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But how do we get to a place to where that is okay?
Yeah. Well, let me throw in something that I love to do, which is talk about some of these brain systems
Mm-hmm.
that are affected by psychological trauma. Because mirror neurons is what comes to mind when I hear people talk about some of the language that was
Mm-hmm.
used in their life. And mirror neurons are part of how your brain soaks up information,
Mm-hmm.
learns words and phrases. This is how I learned to look at this thing and
Mm-hmm.
put this subjective label on it. And so I use the acronym SHITTY to talk about how trauma shapes the way that your brain talks to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so SHITTY is subjective, harsh, intense, terrorizing to yourself. Okay. And so just the concept of being called a bitch, or even take it beyond that, you're too tall, you're too short, your hair is nappy, you fat,
Too
you're
dark.
too dark, you're too loud, you're not enough, you don't help enough, you don't do enough. You
Mm-hmm.
all of these labels, they're
Absolutely.
coming from other people's opinions, judgmental opinions at that.
Absolutely.
But those labels and those words get soaked up into our psyche, and then we have a tendency to even if you don't say it out loud about yourself, it's a label that you carry.
You've
I'm
carried it.
too loud, I'm a bitch, I'm harsh, I'm too. And so
I'm too much of
I'm too
anything.
much of anything. And anytime you're telling yourself that, it's having a very real impact on your internal experience of
Right.
yourself
Right.
and then how you present yourself to the world. So I don't think we'll ever be okay with being talked to like that. But one thing that you said was really important is recognizing that trauma rolls down and out. And
Yes, ma'am.
when, especially when emotions are involved, that amygdala, that part of your brain that generates powerful, invisible urges and surges, they will pull people into behaviors and language and terms that are programmed,
Mm-hmm.
especially from early in life.
Right.
And if you begin to understand that's the way that people talk to her. And she's probably doing a little better than what happened to her. And now this is also where we get into generational and cultural traumas that have not been processed, like racism in America. We're not that far outside of people who were enslaved and beat and violated and talked to any manner of way.
Right.
So as each generation has progressed, we may improve or change some of the ways that we discipline or that
Mm-hmm.
we engage with people, but there's still a lot of pain.
Right.
And there's still a lot of concept that I can violate
Mm.
you physically or I can violate you psychologically with my words
Right.
and cause pain, right? Because we all have that somatosensory cortex, that part of our brain that registers physical and emotional pain,
Right. Right.
and it treats it the exact same way.
Mm.
So being called a bitch, that hurts.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're called a bitch so often that you learn to have high defenses for that, you become desensitized to that language so that you can function. Your mind turns down
The
your
sting stops.
appreciation of the sting, right? You start to
Mhm.
accept it. You might even start to use them. I'll say, yeah, I am a bitch. And what? But then what does that do to when you go out and you're trying to have friendships or relationships or operate in your workplace and other things like that? So really again, it goes back to doing the internal work of, do you want to be a bitch? Do you want to feel bitchy? Do you agree? If someone is calling you something and you've done your self work and you know that you're not
Right.
bitchy, like I can be a bitch
Right.
because I'm not going to let you run over me. But if I know that to my core, I'm kind, I'm loving, I do things for people, I'm helpful,
Right.
then I know that this is coming from a place that's more 99% you and only maybe 1%
Right.
me.
And I call it disowning the label. Where
Absolutely.
at some point, for you to continue your growth, you have to reach a point where first of all, you take inventory of every label that's been attached to you.
Yes.
Right. Everything
Yes.
that they said you were too much of.
Yeah.
Everything that they said that you're not enough of.
Yeah.
Right.
Stupid, ugly, whatever
You
things
know,
people have said.
yeah.
Yeah.
You need to get a trade because you're not going to go to college. You
Yeah.
know. And so I had to disown a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, the biggest breakthrough was really realizing that I did not have to perpetuate the trauma that was given to me.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
do people get to a point to where one, they recognize that this dysfunction is not normal,
Mm-hmm.
right? That this is a
Mm-hmm.
very abnormal way of living,
Yeah.
and I can make a new decision.
Sure. Well, it really is about self-healing. What all of us have to recognize is you only have control over one thing, over one person.
Mm.
As much as we would like to, and it's really fun. The funny thing about the human design is that we're designed to look outward. We're designed to see what other people do, and we are our own biggest blind spot. I can see my fingers,
Mm-hmm.
I see you better than I see myself.
Absolutely.
So that means that we focus on what other people do, but we actually don't do enough focusing on what can I
What can I
do
do?
differently? What can I do better in this situation? And no matter what the other person is doing, I have the responsibility to control myself, to control my words, my language, and to recognize that if I'm calling myself something shitty, subjective, harsh, intense, and terrorizing, then I'm responsible for checking what's my belief about this. Do I want to continue to empower this painful, traumatic belief, or do I want to embrace a healthier me? Do I want to grow? Because anybody can grow at any time. Growth is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to peel your mind off of what that other person is doing
Mm.
and really put your mind on, what am I thinking? What am I saying?
Absolutely.
Am I excusing myself
Right.
to do certain behaviors because of what the other person is doing to me? Because the human brain can justify anything, honey.
Oh yes, I've been there.
Yeah.
Listen, and the smarter you are, the better the justification.
Oh yeah, we can
So
come up with
you
it
get
quick.
real good.
Yes.
So I thank you so much for coming on the show and having this conversation with me.
Sure.
I could not have had this conversation without you. That's it. Period. Okay. Tell the people where they can follow you so that they can get more of this information, because you put this information out all the time.
Absolutely. You can follow me on all the social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. And you can sign up for the Dr. Lana Trauma Recovery Institute at da-tri.org, to try, da-tri.org, where you can learn more about your brain, your body, your behavior, and how trauma impacts us all. But trauma hurts, empathy heals.
All right, you guys. So, one of the things that I wanted to do to make this series special, since we are talking about bettering ourselves within our families, healing from, breakdowns in our families, I thought it would be befitting to have a member of my family on the show. So, you guys, please join me in welcoming my beautiful mother, Miss Tammy Noel. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for coming. So, y'all, my mother is my biggest fan. Okay. Every book, every video, she's just waiting on me to go to Oprah so she can go and meet Oprah with me. And that's just how that goes. So, one of the things, Mom, I was telling everyone is that this series was sparked because I did an Instagram live and everybody had questions about, different breakdowns that they've had within their families. And they're asking me, okay, well, how do you heal from this? And how do you come back from things that may have happened? A lot of my following knows that I left home at 16 and have been independent basically since that time. And so they want to know, okay, well, how do you go from there to having a functional relationship with your family? Because a lot of people don't, unfortunately,
Mhm.
and can say that they were able to mend those breakdowns when they happened. So this series is to help people figure out, okay, well, how do I find solutions, closure with things that happened in the past so that they can't move forward. So I wanted to have you on the show to kind of one to help demonstrate what functionality looks like in a relationship, um, and then for them to see how I interact with you in a
Mhm.
way that is healthy or whole. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot.
So one of the things that I talked about with Dr. Alana is the fact that what makes family relationships difficult is that you have a unit of people and everybody has gone through their own life circumstances. Everybody has lived their own lives, experienced different things, and unfortunately, a lot of them were traumatic things. And we even had Dr. Alana define what trauma is. And a lot of people don't realize that they've been through trauma
Mhm.
because unfortunately, especially in the Black community, we normalize a lot of things to be normal when they were not normal. Does that make
You
sense?
can walk. I found out by experience
Mhm.
that a person that is being traumatized, that is walking in trauma,
Mhm.
can walk that walk and not know.
Mm.
You can think you are living the most functionable life
Mhm.
when truly you're not.
Mm.
And at one point in time in my life, I felt like I was okay. I had a trauma. I was okay from it, and I
Mhm.
was back to living my life. But truly, I
Mhm.
was still very traumatized,
Right.
and nothing in my life was working out because of the way I was trying to force it to what I thought it should be.
Mm.
Um, it took counseling to talk to someone to me to look at myself to figure out this is not right.
Mm.
I'm not as whole as I used to be. I'm not as whole as I would like to be.
So how old were you when you realized that you had been walking in trauma and didn't know it?
You're speaking from a child's point of view or from a woman's point of view?
Both.
Um, as a child, there are things that can happen in your life that can set a child in motion for trauma
Mhm.
and put them in trauma. And if there isn't a positive figure or role model
Mhm.
to help that child along with it, then that child can possibly and quite naturally go into womanhood with that same trauma. Um,
Do you feel like that's what happened for you? Is you went into womanhood with trauma?
I went into womanhood with trauma.
Mhm.
When your brother passed, we didn't know. I realized that day in the hospital, sitting there holding you for you. Remember that? Crying and telling y'all that he wasn't going to be coming home with us.
I remember.
Uh, I realized I had taken y'all for granted.
Mm.
Every parent, whether they realize it or not, takes their kids for granted because we think when we have y'all are supposed to be here to bury us,
Mm.
to outlast us. And when if circumstances happen to change that and we lose one of y'all before, you know, that's the devastation of it there. That's not the way we as parents say that's not the way it's supposed to go,
Right.
you know? So I try now, and I think about all the things I never said to your brother. I was waiting till he turned 16 for his first sweet 16 birthday party
Right.
to get to go to the houses, and we buried him. Well, his 16th birthday, I was viewing him in the morgue.
Yeah.
So I never got that chance.
Yeah.
So now I do that with the rest of y'all. I do it with your nephews.
Mm-hmm.
Your oldest nephew is fixing to be 15. So the things that I didn't do with your brother, I do with him. I wish now I'd have raised my family a lot different. I'd have done a lot of things different in my life with my kids. I mean, don't get me wrong. I know I wasn't a bad mother at all.
Right.
But there's a lot of things that I did wrong because I didn't know any better,
Mm-hmm.
because I was living the way I was brought up,
Exactly.
that I wish now that I know I would have done different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's too late for that. It's too late for my kids, but it's not too late for our relationship
Right.
as mother and father, as uh, young men and young women.
Right.
You know, so it's never too late to start over.
And I would say that that's one of the things that I'm very aware of that you did for us. That for every shortcoming you had, I think one of the most powerful statements you said was understanding why. Because I
Mm-hmm.
would be so upset because my mother, after my brother passed, we could go nowhere. Okay, we could go as far as the end of the driveway. Okay, that was it. All right, I will never forget the day she told us we could go to the movies if we scrubbed the baseboards. That house was scrubbed from top to bottom. Do you think she let us go to the movies? No. Okay, I'm traumatized about it. I'm upset about it, but I'm gonna keep it moving. But it was in those times that I would be so upset with you because it felt controlling. As a child, I didn't understand why is she being like this. As an adult, I understand what it's like to look at life knowing that I could lose my kids at any given time. So, from a trauma perspective, us going to the movies is no longer something as simple as going to the movies.
No.
Anything could happen at the movies. So, I can definitely see from your perspective why that would be triggering for you. Okay, you did not have to make us clean the baseboards. You could have just told us we weren't going nowhere.
Y'all had a very nice, clean house to sit there and watch movies in, didn't you?
I got tired of watching movies. Okay, I wanted to go somewhere. But I think I said that to say is that my entire life, I definitely, when I have memories of you, there's two different women I know. And I know who you were before Chris passed, and I know who you were after. And the woman you were before, I remember very vibrant, and I think of the color yellow. And we would have Friday nights, okay, we would fry pork chops and turn on the blues music. And my mama had her beer and her Black and Mild, and we would all have our dance parties in the living room on Friday. Okay, we had some good times on Fridays.
Yeah.
And life back then was not perfect by any means. But you were definitely a mother who worked endlessly to make sure we had what we needed. It didn't
Yeah.
matter if it was 2 or 3 jobs. It didn't matter if it meant, we got ourselves ready for school because you were already at work and we had to bring ourselves home and start our homework, right? Because you were a single parent of 5 and you were going to make it work the best way you knew how.
Exactly.
And that is where I get my work ethic from. That is
Mhm.
definitely why I work as hard as I do. And I have a no excuse mentality because this
Mhm.
woman gave it to me. So y'all can thank her for how I come at y'all in my coaching sessions. And then there's the woman you were afterwards. And the woman you were afterwards was very much the same, just more sheltered,
Mhm.
didn't take as many risks, more afraid. And by right, I definitely understand why I think all of our realities was shaken
Yeah.
because something happened that we wouldn't have never thought in a million years would be possible for us. And from that woman, I took away what would happen if I did not allow myself to grow. That if I succumb to my fears, that at some point I would get stuck. Okay, you guys, listen. That was the first episode of this series where we're talking about healing from dysfunctional families, toxic family members, and just the conversation that I had with Dr. Alana and my mother about what trauma is. I hope that you have been able to take away your own idea of the ways in which you may have been traumatized, because we have all experienced some level of trauma. And you have to first acknowledge it so that you can do something about it. So really take some time to unpack the ways in which just living life, right? A consequence of just living life has affected you, maybe on a deeper level that may be impacting how you show up in the world. So until our next episode of this amazing series, you guys, like, share, comment, subscribe. Let me know in the comment section how you guys are enjoying this series so far. I'm excited to know your thoughts. You can always DM me on Instagram or shoot me an email as well. Until our next episode, I'll talk to you guys later.